listen-only mode.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Predator-Free New Zealand webinar with the team from Goodnature. My name's Rebecca Bell and I manage the day-to-day operations of the Trust, and I'm going to be your host this evening. So a very warm welcome to all of you. There's still people trickling in as we speak. We've probably got about 24 online at the moment. A couple of things to cover off before we get things going. On the right-hand side of your screen, you'll see that there's a questions box, and that's where you are able to type in questions throughout the webinar. They will come through to me, and then I'll make sure as best I can that Robbie gets to answer those questions. The other thing you can do is there's a raise your hand icon, and that's really if you want to have a verbal conversation with Robbie. What I can do on the control panel here is engage your audio so you can have a conversation with Robbie. The second thing I want to run through is really just the outline for this evening. So what we're going to do is once I hand you over to Robbie, he's going to run you through a presentation. That'll take 10 or 15 minutes. And then what we're going to do is go to the question and answers, which is really the heart of this whole webinar. So we will aim to finish this evening's webinar about 8:30. And without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Robbie Van Dam. So he's one of the directors of the Goodnature team. As many of you know, they have designed and developed these self-resetting traps. And whilst they're being sold here in New Zealand, they're also being sold to over 25 countries around the world. So it's pretty exciting stuff. And we're really grateful that Robbie's made the time to be our first candidate on our Predator-Free webinar. So I'm just going to click a button, and then I'm going to hand you over to Robbie. Who's his name? It's all yours, Robbie.
Fantastic. Hello, everybody. I'm just allowing you to see my screen. Sorry, I'm just so hopefully you can see a small presentation. So we've just, I thought the first thing that I would do is, well, introduce myself and provide you with a little bit of a background to who we are and what we've been doing over the last 10 years. So a few of you will have met parts of the team. There's 18 of us now. The three of us still run the company. We're still best friends, but we have so Craig, Stu, and myself. We started the company 10 years ago with the Department of Conservation. So with the whole idea, obviously, that we're trying to reduce the amount of labour that goes into pest control, and in particular, taking the benefits that we get from trapping and reducing the cost to do that. So a quick overview of how exactly the traps work. So you can see here the little sequence across the bottom is a really basic view. I can't actually see myself, so I hope you can see all of this. Here's the working mechanism inside the trap. So the CO2 comes in through the back here, is regulated down to a manageable pressure through the regulator here, and is stored in this reservoir. When the animal comes along, he activates this little trigger here. So this wire here is actually just the trigger. It's a hair trigger, so we can tune that to set off at around 20 grams, or that's how the factory is set. So it sets off as the animal's going to interrogate a little bait that sits up the top here. And as the animal triggers that little wand, the striker comes out, crushes them up against the what we term the anvil, but this big rubber buffer on the back side here, crushes their little head. They fall to the ground. The next animal's capable of, or the trap's capable of resetting itself and being triggered again within a couple of seconds. The next animal can then interrogate the trap, do the same thing. And then the last little icon there is just what we tend to see, and we're aware of this through some of the large-scale trials that have been going on with the Department of Conservation. So we know that within about 42 hours, anywhere between 40 and 90% of everything was scavenged through a trap trial that they ran, which was around about 4,000 A24s. So it gives you a very real picture of what actually goes on. So generally, finding stuff under the devices well, you tend not to see those things. We rely very heavily on post monitoring once you've installed the devices. So the next thing was just really just illustrating where these devices are in use and where around the country. This is a little bit old now, so they don't quite cover everything. But in New Zealand, these are the traps in use by the Department of Conservation. Now, conservation organisations all across the country obviously take a lot of different shapes and forms, and some of them are in collaboration with DOC, and some are DOC themselves, and then some are community groups and regional council groups or associations between the two. And all of those we're involved with from sometimes the inception right the way through to the deployment, and that's, for the last 15 years, that's what I in particular have been up to, is trying to understand what people are trying to get from their protection, and then working out the methodology to do that. And often we're out there actually installing them. So Monday and Tuesday, we were setting up a project in the Sounds. The week before that, we were doing a couple of 100 hectares of establishment over in Pukaha, Mount Bruce. Before that, up on Barrier Island. So all over the country, and all around the world. So we, as I was talking about before, we rely more on monitoring the decline than necessarily what we find underneath the devices. You'll all be familiar with the different tracking methods that are available, and we of course have detector cards as well, which basically calibrate. We have a very simple calibration system that aligns it with tracking tunnels, but essentially, we rely very heavily on monitoring to give outcome status. One of the projects that I thought would be most easily presented to you and most easily understood is a project that we undertook, which was initiated as a trial with the Fiordland Conservation Trust, and in particular the Kids Restore Kepler. So we started a trial just off the side of the Kepler. So this is the very entrance of the Kepler Walk. And we started with where the black dots are in the centre here. So this area here was the start of the project. These two lines here are actually we just established a network of devices that we could monitor for long-term reliability trial. But in essence, the network that was established here was around 250 hectares, and it was to be run by a 17-year-old boy. So we established this with the trust and the Department of Conservation, and this was all run during the beach fast. So we wanted to see how these devices performed during really high, plague levels of rats. We took the rats, I think we follow on from here. So these were where the devices were placed at DOC best practice, so 100 metre apart lines. So all of these lines are 100 metres apart, and then the devices are spaced at 50 metre intervals. So we just copied basic DOC best practice. We thought, we'll see how it stacks up to that. The devices drove, so you can see here the pre-monitor was at 68%, so that was relatively high. Its area is consistently outside of a mast season is sitting around 10 or 12%. So it was it was in the midst of a really good mast season. We drove those animals. So the first monitor that we did was here in February. So and you can see we drove it down to 0%. So it's not to say that the 0% wouldn't have occurred earlier. It's simply that we didn't do a monitor any earlier. But that was obviously what we were after. The next, I guess, the next interesting thing was that so this figure is what that network is currently at today. So we're now 16 months in. Or since the establishment of this, I think maybe a little bit longer, and the devices are still doing exactly that. So while the while the non-treatment has gone up and down, so it's actually sitting now down in the 30s, but while it's fluctuated and sitting still relatively high, we're still at 0%. So it's about that ongoing pest control. So just some nice graphs. The next bit here is an illustration of an experiment that we then did with that network. We took every second trap and we distributed each of those traps out to so by removing every second trap, of course, we then had a network of 100 by 100 100 by 100 network. So that drove it out to 600 hectares, actually about 650. So we wanted to see, while the rat tracking was still very high, we wanted to see whether we could drive those animals down to the same density as we achieved with a high density of traps. And this is simply because we're trying to understand how we can drive down the cost of undertaking large-scale pest control and how we can reduce the maintenance, we're always trying to look at these cost efficiencies. So you can see here, now this is slightly skewed, this number here. So 44% is slightly skewed because if you remember, 5 of these tracking tunnel lines here, these 5, were all in the middle of where we had already eradicated everything. So they were still tracking 0%. So this actually represents 80% or 88%. Okay, so the rats were still very high. Okay, so the 44% is actually what's happening in the other 5 tracking tunnels that were distributed around the site. So you can see there, the month later we were at 6%, and then a couple of months later we were down at 0 and 1. So, and as I said, that whole network is now still at 0% after all of that time. While over at our non-treatment site, we're there. Again, some pretty graphs. So in between that, we were doing these reliability studies just to illustrate. We obviously started poorly with some reliability issues with the A24. So 4 years ago when we released the product, we had those issues. We wanted to illustrate just how much gas was being consumed over those earlier, through the earlier periods of the control program. So this represents the full CO2 canisters around the outside. So the green dots are how much gas is in a canister available at day 1. The dots are the actual measured CO2 in each of the devices, and we understand this by weighing the devices. We have some really sensitive scales, and we take the CO2 canister out. So sorry, we weigh the trap pre-removal of the CO2 canister, remove the gas, and then weigh the trap again, and the subtracted number is how much gas was left in there. And then the blue dots are the average. Okay, so the average is sitting out here around 10. So this is after 6 months of full operation at rats at 68%. Okay, so there's still obviously plenty of gas here. So especially when you consider that each triggering of the trap only uses 0.5 of a gram of gas. Okay, so you're still at 20 strikes. The average is still 20 strikes. So even traps that are down around here, you've still got what is that? Say 5 or 6 kills available to you. So, and here's those numbers that are in a different way. The following 6 months, so we continue to do these every 6 months. So we do these little wagon wheels and trying to understand how much gas consumption. The following months, when the traps are doing very little work, you can see here how well or how little gas, how little activity there is for each of these traps. Okay, so hardly any gas is consumed. So, in summary, that's as far as I wanted to really talk, because I thought that this would at least spur a bit of a conversation, and we'd be able to get a few questions through. The other things that I wanted to illustrate to you, how we're trying to extend and reduce the labour content of deploying these types of devices are through things, especially or in particular, the baits. So these are the baits that we currently use. So it's a static bait, and we expect that every month that you'll come in, you'll unwind the cap, and then you'll tap down some fresh bait, and you'll encourage the animal to go in to the trap through pre-feeding. So over the last year and a half or 2 years, we've been developing a new mechanism, which is, I mean, it looks very simple, but what's happening up at the top here is a little hydrogen generator. So in behind the 10-cent coin there, so you remove the 10-cent coin, and up in here, so underneath the 10-cent coin, or as soon as you remove that, there's a little magnet there that activates a hydrogen cell, and the hydrogen starts to generate, and as it generates gas, it dumps out the bait on the front side. So you install this into the compartment in the top of the trap, and as the hydrogen generates over 6 months, it does all of the pre-feeding that you would have done manually as you visit the site. So by the end of the 6 months, this is an inflated hydrogen cell, and on the other side, there's no bait left. Okay, so using these types of mechanisms to remove another layer of your check regime. I think that's where I'm at, Bet. So
Okay.
I think it's a good time for questions, maybe.
That's great. Thank you, Robbie. So I've got some questions for you. First of all, from William Griffiths. He says, with regards to your new stoat bait, whether it's in the shade, out of the sun, and in the traps, how long before it needs replacing? Is it good for cats? And is there any research details available? I want to start using it in a line of Victor traps and boxes.
Absolutely. So stoat baits, we've been testing those for 3 years now in Fiordland against their standard baiting regime, which is egg and meat. So the combination of those. So we have 3 years worth of data. So I'm more than happy to share that stuff. It's not in a pretty format. It's just a Word document at the moment, but I'm more than happy to share. So there are 3 trials within that. So we've got 2 different bait types targeted at stoats. One we call Black Magic, one is called Pest, and they are proven to be equal to or better than rabbit, fresh rabbit and egg on 4 weekly check regimes. So equivalent to that. And the rabbit paste, the other trial that we've run is that against erase, and we've proven that it is equal to erase. That's hopefully that answers. So we do monthly check regimes, just as most people do with that particular bait. At the moment, we're trying to develop another bait that we can automate. So at the moment, we only have the rabbit paste is the one that we are selling with the devices that is automated, and we're developing the stoat and the possum ones as well.
Great.
Cats. Yes, it's good for cats. We personally, I always use fresh rabbit meat for cats. It's always worked really well for me and for our devices. But I think that's possibly because the devices that I'm using, it's difficult to get the mince. It's ground up the rabbit paste that we sell, so it's very difficult to feed that into the bite block and get it to stabilize, to be held tightly on there to be a good trigger. So personally, I like a bit of rabbit meat with fur on it.
And
each their own.
That's great. And just a question from Bill Hester: does stoat bait also work for rats?
Yeah. So the interesting thing about that project that I was just showing you on Harts Hill is that one of the best, so in the first check, so 3 weeks into the project, we went out and checked out some of those traps. Under one of the first traps that we visited, there were 4 dead stoats under it. Okay, so that's we were attempting to catch rats only, or rats with the rat bait that we were using, and we arrived at this site that has this incredible, that's like jackpot for us. And but that's really just a good story. It's not something that we would recommend to anybody to use. It's just an inquisitive family group was available at the device and were all killed. The stovebaits obviously where we would direct you, but we can say with all certainty that the rabbit paste and the black magic are both statistically better than egg and fresh rabbit meat for rats. If that, yeah.
In a question from Kevin Collins, his experience is that animals consume the lure that has been smeared on the tree below the trap before they are killed. Then the trap resets, but is much less effective because the pre-feed lure is absent. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, we know that there's always a spike after pre-feeding, and that's with any scenario. We know that you're 70% more likely to catch another animal in a device that's previously killed an animal. So, so while the presence of the lure or the pre-feed isn't there and available, you've already killed something, and that creates interest around the site, and it does increase the chance that you will catch a second animal. I guess that's really why we've been, inventing these sorts of things. These long life lures and these, the ability to dispense constantly fresh available baits means that although an animal might take that pre-feed, you have a constantly available food source for the animals to get. So I think we're moving past that very quickly.
That's great. A question from Tim Kelly, where they are planning a hedgehog eradication project for a rabbit-proof fenced reserve. We have rat lure for the A24s we will use. Will this work well for hedgehogs? And what height off the ground should the trap be set for hedgehogs?
Yes, Mr. Kelly. So we kill hedgehogs really well with these with the A24s, and in fact, the Greater Wellington Regional Council have just been doing a bunch of work at a dotterel site here, and they use A24s solely for that because they're struggling to get them in there. Dot 200s, certainly the bigger ones. They have gone to the lengths of setting the trap and putting a little ramp underneath, because sometimes when the animals hit, a hedgehog just curls up in a little ball and sits here underneath. So you want to set it, the maximum that you can set it and still control and still kill them really well is about 150 mils between the ground and the base of the trap. So we normally would say 120 mils. I just put my hand on it on the side there, and that's about 120 millimeters above the ground. But when you're trying to deal with hedgehogs, try and do it in a way that underneath the trap has a little bit of a roll away so that the animal will clear itself. And you'll find that the peanut or the chocolate that we supply are both good, but also the stove bait is really good with them. I mean, they'll eat anything, what they're like. And you should, I would imagine that you'll get on top of them pretty quickly. Yeah.
That's great. Question from Arthur Underwood. What traps do you have for rabbits and how successful are they?
We don't have a trap for rabbits, but it's funny you should ask, because a lot of people have been asking about those. We don't, the only resetting trap sort of, sits on your shoulder there, the only effective one that I know of. The reason we haven't done any work on a rabbit trap is that these devices have taken, or we know that it's going to take 2 years to make the device really reliable and effectively killing animals. And for 2 years, to run an operation this size, we simply and the fact that nobody's proven that that they can control them with traps alone. It just makes it a really big research project and make it, the financial investment in something that would be colossal and extremely difficult for us to get back. If I mean, everybody would like it, but I can't. We don't have plans for that at the moment. that I can tell. Yeah.
That's okay. And a question from Andrew McClellan. I understand the scavenging and need for post-monitoring, but are there any plans to build in counters to devices, as volunteers love to see some immediate feedback when checking devices?
Yeah. Yep. So currently we know that feedback is like I totally agree. The feedback loop, when we developed the counter, I was pretty skeptical as to what that was going to do for the device, in the sense that I really thought the most important thing is the monitoring, but in terms of an engagement tool, I totally agree. The counter is critical, and at the moment, we're looking at going beyond what our current counter can provide you. So we would really like to get to a point where we can tell you a lot more information than simply 1 through 99, and that may need some connectivity or some ability to transfer data from the device into say your cell phone or something. We don't have any plans to have them communicating over distances or that, just because our devices, the setup cost is already high, so having that information is only going to really ramp that up. If you buy, if traps are bought currently through through our rural retail chains, so we sell through farmlands and PGG Wrightsons, then we sell them as a complete kit and you get a cheaper counter. But we can certainly help community groups if they want that same sort of deal done in bulk. The way that we've designed that counter sort of limits our production in some ways, and just making things in New Zealand is really expensive. But at the moment, we don't sell enough counters, of course, to then make 20,000 of them to drive down that cost. So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg thing at the moment.
Okay, just a question from Bill Hester. Does your A24 work for all variety of rats? Ship in Norway.
And Kiori, yeah. So, what's that?
So it works for all of them.
Yeah, so Native Island, so the island that we worked on down in just off Stewart Island has all 3 species. Now, scientifically, we're not allowed to say that because we never actually observed a Kiori, and that's due to the weka. There's huge numbers of weka there, but that island, it makes we believe that there are Kiori, or that there were Kiori on that island, because they're directly on the mainland, and the mainland's only 60 meters away. There is absolutely no reason why there wouldn't be Kiori on there. So ship rats, Norway rats are a given. They're easily controlled, or we've seen those and we can report on that. The Kiori, though, we're doing a project on Great Barrier, where of course that's all they've got, and another one. Where's the other one? We're doing a second. Sorry, it's escaped me. So we're doing another site that has Kiori and ships. Anyway, it kills them well. It actually kills mice really well as well. So we go anywhere from the smallest mouse that we've recorded as a 9-gram mouse, all the way through to these devices, killing the biggest stoat that we've recorded is 420 grams as well. So that should give you some perspective as to what the device is doing.
Okay, that's great. And Clearbacks is asking, is there any difference in the effectiveness if the trap is put higher up the tree so the wekas don't get hit?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, good. So on Native Island, we put all of the traps at 700 mils above the ground, so that we wouldn't catch any of the weka. And we've just started another project in the Sounds on Pickersgill Island, and we're in exactly the same situation. We've set them all at 700 mils above the ground. We are pretty confident that it may slow the time it takes to control them, but if you imagine that they they're very arboreal and they spend most of their time in the canopy anyway. And if they've got a natural predator on the ground, like a weka, then our expectation is that there is no reason why control them with the traps at 700 mils above the ground. So the other thing was that down at Harts Hill there on the Kepler, they were all set at 700 mils above the ground as well, because that was frequently snowed upon, and we lifted them all above the ground just so that they were easy to find, basically, so that they were above the crown fern and we could see them, and that got them to 0%. So I am confident that you can. The possum trap, on the other hand, the higher that you go, we know that it diminishes the effectiveness of captures. So this is through the results that we got out of the Urewera. So they had them all set at 1.5 metres above the ground to avoid pig interference. But then they realised that actually the pigs weren't interfering, because all they wanted was the dead possum, and the possum was always ended up on the ground anyway. So they put them down at 700 mils above the ground, and they had this massive spike in control, and managed to knock them down to the suitable standard of below 5%. So
that's great. Question from Gillian Wadhams. Hello, what is the lifespan of the A24 before it corrodes or parts wear out? Is it necessary to do maintenance periodically, as for the DOC 200 series of traps?
Okay. So all of the devices come with a 2-year warranty, and we've tested these things. So we have a fully equipped workshop here behind me with cycle chambers, and we test everything from minus 5 through to plus 40, and we cycle, trying to understand how long the devices will last. They've only been available for 3.5 years, so I can say that in terms of the materials that we've used, we know that they'll last at least that long. All of the materials that we use in here are corrosion resistant, at least, so this is brass. All of the steel that's in there is stainless steel. They're all stainless steel screws that hold the device together, and the rest is plastic. There is some maintenance over time, but most of that comes through. So when you use our gas bottles, the tips of the gas bottles have silicon on them, and they pump the silicon back up through the regulator, and the silicon ends up lubricating all the O-rings and all the seals inside the device. So we expect that maybe after 5 years there would be some form of, the same sort of thing as that I'm describing here, some form of maintenance, like making sure that silicon is used regularly. But yeah, as far as we can tell, we think that they'll last beyond the 5-year limit. But we can't say that with certainty just at this early stage in the product, really. Any part of the device can be upgraded or serviced. So we try not to make anything that would obsolete anything that we've done in the past. So parts are made to be broken down. So we made the whole system so it was fully recyclable. So we can put on a new regulator, so you can send in the device and we can update it, or we can send you service devices to fulfill the gap while we service your network. We don't foresee any issue around the maintaining the effectiveness.
Okay, question from Grant Ryan. I used to have great success with possum traps 2 years ago, but recently they are taking bait below but not catching. He's got a video trap that shows them around the trap but not actually killing them. Have you got any suggestions?
Yep. First thing is to move it. So we know that will increase the effectiveness of the trap. There are a couple of things that you can do at the trigger of the device. So making sure that it's regularly. So if you've cameraed it, then I'm guessing that you know that it's a possum that's consuming all of the bait. If it's not that though, so if for any reason you're seeing consumption by rats, then obviously you have other concerns. So the possum trap, make sure that it's set at 700 mils above the ground. So the entrance is 700 millimeters from the foot to the entrance. They obviously love the bait that you're using, but simple changes in that bait, so maybe just for a short stint, you could use some of the peanut lure or just peanut butter, or some jam. Just cycle those things around. So those are other things, and popping it onto a different tree sometimes does the trick. Yeah.
Okay, another question from Tim Kelly. What's your current recommendation for duration of cylinder use in low pest density areas? Is it safe to assume that it's good for a year?
Yeah, Tim. So we have a standard line a standard policy that we have for people using the devices, and we say that 6 months. Change the gas after 6 months, because we know people lose track of things. I visited someone earlier this evening, and I know exactly when they bought the device, and asked them if they had any recollection of the last time they changed the bait. It had been 9 months since they had either changed the bait or regassed the trap. Now there was gas still in the trap, but they had their thought was that they had had it for 5 months. So we lose track very, very quickly, and so we always say 6 months, because if we said a year, it would go out to 2 years or even longer. We have, where you've got low pest densities, and what you saw from the reliability stuff obviously illustrates that there's always more gas available, and we would never want to see you having a device flat and getting hammered by rats. So a rat will eat into it. So for those of you who have ever let these go flat, or that the device has malfunctioned or something, rats will just hammer it, and they'll do anything they can to get the bait. So if it's not live, they'll do that, and I would just hate for you to have that happen to you. But yeah, the way that you cycle those, there are a bunch of different ways that you can do that. Like the devices, weighing the devices is a difficult one, because you need to take the gas canister out because the trap itself takes up moisture. So there's no kind of easy way to understand how much gas is left in there. We always think that when you're buying them in 10 packs, they're $4, and that it's just an easy safety thing to do, just to make sure that it's always hammering if you do them at 6 months. We are working this year towards ensuring that the devices are, so hopefully by this time next year, we will have the devices in a position where we can comfortably say that you can set it and forget it for a solid year, and that again is in our drive to drive down the cost of maintenance and to increase the effectiveness of the trap.
That's great. A question from Andrew McClellan. I read recently some research looking at the range of rats up to which you can still knock the population down. The figure of spacing was somewhere between 400 and 700 metres. What conclusions did your Kepler research reach on the maximum spacing of devices to still achieve a 0 to 5% residual population?
Yeah, so that project we got to 1 per hectare, and now we're pushing to see that happens in podocarp forest. So obviously, having 1 trap per 2 hectares, or even 1 per 3 in beech forest, has a really high potential. We really think that that's what's going to happen. If you can suppress them while they're still at very, very low densities, then you won't have these spikes, and that's obviously something that we're really driving towards. We're not yet in a position where we can say that we are capable of having less than 1 trap per hectare and still be capable of controlling pests. We would need to do another island where we would put them out at say 1 per 2 hectare. Now we're doing that in October, but specifically we're doing it to do an eradication of stoats off Great Island and Fiordland, and so the idea is that we'll put, it's a 700 hectare island, we'll put 200 traps out there, we'll try and kill all the stoats, and then we'll monitor the decline of the rat population as well and see whether at a very, very low density, whether we have an effect on that population of rats, and then we might double that to say 400 and or say 350 over 700 hectares and see whether we can control all the rats. And we'll just work up until eventually we do eradicate the rats, and then we can give you that figure. But that's as far as we've taken it. Good question, though.
Question from Kevin Collins. Those were good stats about how much gas remains. Does that imply that in places where pest numbers are low, you don't need to replace the gas every 6 months? If so, the extra cost of giving the traps wireless reporting capability might be offset by reduced long-term labour costs.
Yep, it's true.
Okay.
Absolutely. We'd love to be in a position where you've got to remember that we're selling devices. I don't know where you're based, but we're selling devices from Hawaii, where we're talking about 19 rats per hectare, to say to the South Island and the beach forest, where you're talking about 2 rats per hectare or 3 rats. So we're trying to give a clear indication of something that will suffice to all these levels, So, and of course, then you're talking about different forest types all the way across that, and then you're talking about inside people's homes and all of those other concerns. So the numbers that I'm giving you are, again, quite specific to a specific location and forest type, and we're just too small to give really accurate figures for all of the different types of habitat, and they're probably more general than, of course, we'd love to give you some really clear and really accurate information as to how much gas. I guess the issue is that when we're killing things through, so we know the density of rats individually, we know the density of mice as individuals, we know the density of hedgehogs individually, and we've got a device here that, and stoats, and we've got a device that kills all 4 species, and so of course there's always the dynamic, one suppresses another, and then so they're always in fluctuation. You can never really tell. So at home, so I live here just in Wellington, just a normal city, small 400 square metre section, it's nothing big or anything. We've got a council toxin station across the street, or it's 35 metres from my front gate. At the back of the property I have a trap under some stairs, and then at the front of the property I have a trap just on a screw to a tree. At the back of the property I've killed 18 things in the last 6 months, and at the front of the property I've killed 17 things. Now at the back of the property I see everything that I kill, so every time there's a count on the counter I see the dead thing on the ground. At the front of the property there's I've seen probably 3 or 4 things, very, very few things there. And the neighbour's cat just sits there thinking it's a feed station. So the dynamics over 6 months, and that's right in the heart of the city. Now the previous 6 months, the back was only something like 5 or 6, and down the front was 8 or 9. So the difference between those 2 things means, so certainly for a year's worth, if I just left them, I would be disappointed. I would have, flat, and I would be missing animals. But I don't know the dynamics of the pests in your backyard. But sometimes it's fine to leave them for longer than 6 months, and certainly that's what happened, this afternoon. So.
Okay, great. Just keeping an eye on the time, it's 8:18, so we've got another 10 or so minutes. Question from Paul O'Brien. Are you looking at pheromone lures for rats and or possums?
Yep. Yep. So we were working with Victoria University until very recently, doing their working with them around urine. We have two different stoats. So we have a stoat anal scent gland one that works really well in stoat and DOC 200s, but we're yet to make it work really well in our A24s, just because the dynamic, of an animal going to eat something in the top of the trap rather than just running across a treadle is quite different. So we have the pheromone-based one for stoats, and we have the scent of a rat, which is actually just the headspace of a rat. So the chemical notes taken from the GCMS of just the smell of the animal we developed it as a prey lure for. We thought that we would attract stoats, but in fact it attracts rats very, very well. And the Hawke's Bay Regional Council used that across a couple of thousand of their DOC 200s, and it delivers them constant bait or constant attractant across a year, and they get very good results from that. Personally, I believe and think that a really, really good food bait has managed to eradicate dozens and dozens of islands, and I'm confident that that is the extending the life of those is the key to success with these devices.
Thank you. So a question from Tejo Van Shee. Can you use your machine for killing hedgehogs without killing cats?
Yeah. So the cats struggle very much to get in here, and this device would never kill it just doesn't have the power to kill a cat. Using the peanut lure or the cinnamon lure or our chocolate lure, you'll control hedgehogs and you won't kill cats. Yeah.
Okay, great. Clearbex is asking, we want to kill both rats and stoats. Which lure should we use?
I would suggest a mixture or a combination of those, and Claire, I think a combination is best, but if you're just going to select one, then I would go with the stoat lure right the way across your network.
Great. And a question from Tim Kelly. How long is the currently sold rat lure good for?
Well, I know what you're going to say, Tim, and you're going to leave it in there for longer after your last comment. But we know that every time you refresh the lure, you get a spike in captures. There's 60 grams in there, and we know that, personally, when I tap down new bait and I apply that underneath the trap, I generally only use 5 grams of bait. So it's much, much less than we have been supplying. The front of the bait, though, oxidizes, and we know that there is some rancidity in the peanut butter one, but the chocolate one we think lasts much longer. There are different ways of using the baits, and there are other more economical ways than just buying the static lures like this. And so if you've got large-scale projects, I would encourage you to start using, we have different ways like using, we have pouches of the bait, which are $15, but they're 500 grams rather than these which are $7.50 and they're 60 grams. So I would suggest that that's, if you've got large-scale projects, it's way more economical to buy the larger packs.
Right. So just a comment from Francis Orr, he says he's found the possum paste to be very successful for rats and hogs, and he's also just got his first stoat with it last week, so he's seemingly pretty happy.
Really? A stoat on wow, that's awesome. On the possum, the possum lure is a real cracker. We know that it kills rats, but we've never actually done a full-on study on it, and we'd love to know how well you can control rats. The reason we would love to do that is that it lasts so well. There's no proteins in there, and it's really consistent, so it's incredibly stable. We just don't know how many rats we end up killing with it. So yeah, that's interesting.
And just probably got about time for another 2, 3 questions. One from Arthur Underwood. He's saying, what is the optimum height for opossum traps? And what is the optimum height possum traps should be set above the ground? And can there be any other reason why the traps may not be effective? And this may link back to Grant Ryan's question earlier.
Yeah. 700 mils above the ground is the minimum height that we set because we achieved the humane standard with that. So we know, of course, you can set them much lower and you'll get animals in there faster, but we don't. Sometimes you won't kill them. You won't kill them effectively or humanely. So we say 700 mils because we know that the animal will then fully engage with the tree. So they'll have both paws on the tree, they'll put their head up into it, and we know that we'll strike them and kill them really well. So 700 mils is just above your knee height, halfway up my thigh because I'm not very tall. But you want to set them, you want to make sure that they are 700 mils above the ground because that, that is the kind of the humane standard. But also we know that at that height you'll still get really good captures. The higher you set them, the more difficult it is. Possums are lazy. The very best. The very best way to catch a possum is a leg hold trap. They do nothing. They spend all their time on the ground, or a lot of their time on the ground anyway. They don't have to make an effort, and they end up in it. Then I guess a trap on the ground, like a Tim's trap, and then a trap like ours set on a tree. The reason, of course, we're setting them on a tree is that it can reset itself, and it has to clear itself, and it has to do all those other things, so that you can leave them. And the difference between the difference between the benefit of using those other two traps and our device, is just a matter of time. And so hopefully you can, leave the trap out long enough, and the time factor works in your favour.
Okay, just a question from Jim Talbot. Can Robbie give some advice about the use and value of hit counters attached to the gas cylinders?
Right. So counting the number of dead things in terms of conservation benefit, it doesn't really support any understanding of effectiveness or the effectiveness of you and your group's work. Okay, so you might have killed 5 animals. The counter tells you that you've killed 5 animals. It either illustrates that you've killed everything, or that you've killed 5 of potentially a dozen animals. So you've really done nothing towards achieving the conservation benefit that you need to achieve to have a successful, say, reintroduction of birds or increase in bush birds. All it is a standard metric to tell you that the device is killing animals that are coming to it. Okay, so to provide you with confidence and maybe support your community groups. I don't think that you can ever use it, and I don't know how you would ever be able to use it as a metric for success. Okay, so your metrics for success have to be tracking. So you have to do monitoring, some form of monitoring, and there are dozens available, and we'd need another 5 or 6 hours to go through that. But I think the benefit of using a counter is all about providing you with comfort that the device is A, it's working, it's killing animals, and B, that there's gas left in the device. So that's where I think the true benefits of that mechanism are.
It's great. So we've just got 2 more questions to cover off in 3 minutes. Andrea Wilson is asking, do you know of any instances where a cat has put its paw up into a trap?
No, and I would imagine that that would be the first people to be called if we had put someone's cat at risk. I do know, so I've certainly seen it myself with feral cats up in Hawaii, but I think that that there's probably other drivers for an animal like that up there. So it was practically starving, and we were filling the trap with sardines, so it was highly palatable, and yeah, so as long as you don't do silly things like that, then there's no reason, I would expect there's no reason for your cat to do it. An easy way to check whether your cat would be interested in the device is to put the bait that you're using in the cat's food bowl, and see whether it has any inclination to try it. And I'm pretty confident that it won't. Yeah, pretty certain it won't. So on one hand, yes, I've seen it, but we don't hear of it. We've never heard of it here, and I'm certain that people would very quickly get in touch with us had they put themselves or their animal at risk. We're confident that the baits that we supply with the device won't harm non-targets.
Okay. And finally, we'll just finish with one question from Francis Orr. How do you feel about traps on ramps and paste in the barrel?
Paste in the barrel. Maybe you could chase up. I'm unsure about what that what you mean there, but traps on ramps. Okay, it's critical. It's critical that the devices are set vertically to achieve humaneness. To achieve humaneness, the devices have to be very effective as well, and so we've achieved both of those things, so effectiveness and humaneness by setting them so that the traps are set vertically. Okay. Now I know if you tip the trap over this orientation, so we've seen this in the past, or on 45 degrees, we know that you can catch animals. There's no denying, but the devices were never designed to work that way. So sometimes, it introduces a whole bunch of things that we don't want to encourage. So non-targets, you can put other birds at risk. So we don't encourage that. If you are going to use, so sometimes people use a running board. So you have your tree like that, and have a running board. Then use the top of the running board as the ground and set your trap 700 mils above that. Okay, and that's for the possum trap. And with the A24, I don't think you'll increase the effectiveness by tipping it on an angle. If you do tip it on an angle, all you're doing is providing the animal plenty more room to avoid touching the trigger. Okay, so it can stand up on the inside of the walls here. Inside the tube, I'm guessing that you mean if you put bait up inside here. I don't think that there's any harm in doing that, and all you're doing is encouraging your possum to get in there. The only side or sort of consequence that you might want to think about as well is that by putting an attractive bait on the inside of the possum trap shroud there, you might be encouraging rats down the line to gnaw on the plastic. Just a thought, I don't know.
Okay, that's great. Well, it's 8:30, everyone, so I think it's time to close off this webinar. So a big thank you to Robbie for taking the time to share his knowledge with us this evening. I know you're busy, Robbie, so it's greatly appreciated by me at Predator Free, and I'm sure the rest of the people online at the moment. For those of you who are listening to this webinar, we have recorded it, so I'm planning to put this up on our website as a resource, so that you can share it with some of your community groups and other folks who might be interested. As an aside, on the 5th of May, we've got another webinar with Darren Peters from the Department of Conservation, and this will be talking about the DOC trapping series, so the DOC 200, the DOC 250s, and the DOC 150s with Darren. So if you're interested, get in touch if you haven't already, and sign up for that webinar. We're really interested in your feedback generally, because if this works, if this is an easy way for us to communicate with you guys, this is something we can put in place more regularly, and it could have a range of topics. So this one and the one with Darren is really just a trial, but we, personally, I feel it feels like a really good way to communicate with everyone without too much hassle. So if this is a way that works for you, do let us know, and then we can put some things in place. So I'm going to sign off now, and thanks, Robbie, and enjoy the rest of your evening.
Thank you, everybody, for listening. It was. I hope that we can help you in any way. And of course, you can always get in touch with me or any of the Goodnature team at any point in time if you need any more information. And it's great to hear from you guys as well. Anything that we can do to make our stuff better just makes New Zealand better. Thank you.